Shabbat Shalom. One of the great things about Jewish study is that we are open to the idea that you need to study. That is to say that it's not simply so straightforward as opening up the Torah, reading the words, and boom, you know what God is telling you, but that instead there are multiple layers that need to be peeled back, often a layer being of history. Let me give you just a basic understanding of this. If I say the word to you, chesed, right? Wonderful, short, shorish root word chesed. What does it convey? What does it mean? Anyone know what the most common translation is? Kindness or loving kindness, which I will tell you really messes up the line spacing whenever trying to translate Hebrew into English. Because if Hebrew has 3 letters, chesed, and I have to write loving kindness on the opposite English side, they don't line up so well. But the thing is, chesed doesn't only mean loving kindness. Well, that is to say, it does mean loving kindness, depending upon which era in which the word is being used. That chesed in its older form doesn't mean loving kindness at all. It means fidelity. It means trustworthy loyalty. But over time, our ancestors quite rightly reasoned that, well, if somebody is 100% loyal, 100% trustworthy to come through in a clutch, well, that's showing a great deal of love, and their actions will be incredibly kind because of that root emotion of loyalty. So over time, you'll find in Hebrew texts, the word chesed moves from meaning that fidelity to meaning loving kindness. Does that mean the earlier ones are wrong? Does that mean the later ones are right? Well, no, each was right in their own time, and we have to be careful when translating the older texts to try and figure out what they mean. For example, in this week's Torah portion, we read that one is meant to love the ger. What is a ger? And don't tell me that fish that lives in Florida. That's a gar. What? A foreigner. So, one answer, and you could have guessed that there's going to be more than one. One answer is that we read the word ger with the classical idea that this is a person who has taken up residence in your area, but they are not from around here. Right? They are a foreigner, they are an alien, they haven't quite reached the level of being a resident alien, they don't have their green card yet, but they are a stranger among you, meaning that they are not one of your people, they are from some other group, they are a ger. And this gets translated often as stranger for that reason. Sometimes it gets translated as alien, although within the 20th century we stopped translating that as alien because people keep thinking of UFOs. So instead, we might translate this just as the stranger who happens to be from another place that's living among you, which is even longer than loving kindness, and that's why we just shorten it to stranger. But that is not the only translation of the word ger as used by Jewish tradition. I see a hand pumping the air. So sojourner is a lovely idea, but the term ger in and of itself doesn't imply whether a person is going to return home or not. So in English, the word sojourn or refugee would imply that there is an anticipation of a return, that eventually they will go home, go back where they came from in a less polite way of putting it. A ger does not have that particular connotation. It's just a definition, at least from the first one we've been working with, of somebody who is here now, but they're not from here originally. And what their long-term status is, that term in that definition doesn't cover. Can be what? So that's another translation to go with the word sojourn, to dwell in a place. But again, it has a connotation that the person is not from here. In modern Hebrew, we can get a little bit more generic, just meaning to dwell somewhere. But at least within biblical and rabbinical tradition, it is more this, you're not from here, but you're here now. Well, maybe if I add in a more common adjective, you'll recognize the other translation, a ger tzedek. Apparently, no one does the Amidah on a daily basis on weekdays. Ger is also classically, in rabbinic literature, translated to mean somebody who converted, somebody who has chosen to become Jewish. They're not from here, but they're here now, meaning they were not born into Judaism, but now they're here. And so within rabbinic tradition, the word ger becomes predominantly associated with those who have converted. The question then becomes, what did the Torah mean when the Torah said ger? Now, very often the rabbis will translate the word as a convert, perhaps retroactively, implying that the Torah meant the same thing they meant. And sometimes the word convert wouldn't really fit in that context, and the stranger among you is a much better terminology. Well, what do we do with the passage we have today? That you should love the ger because you were once a ger in the land of Egypt. Are we talking converts or are we talking strangers among you? Well, let's break it down. If we're talking about people who have converted, if we are going to analyze the text with that as our primary definition, then what would the text be trying to tell us? Love and don't oppress and be kind to those that have converted to Judaism. Seems a little redundant. After all, we have an obligation to love our fellow as ourselves already. We have an obligation to not oppress other Jews. And once somebody has converted, they're a Jew. They would fall under the category and protection of those other mitzvot, and therefore there would be no need to spell out that we have an extra obligation to love or not oppress them. It seems rather superfluous. Says our tradition, you might think so, but you'd be wrong. Instead, if we look at human behavior, we see there is very good reason why the Torah might have wanted us to redouble our efforts to love the convert and to protect them from any oppression within the community. Reason number one, they are among the most vulnerable within our community. As we see in other psalms and passages throughout the Torah and rest of Tanakh, the ger is often set alongside the widow and the orphan. The commonality of all of these is that they do not have the same family support structure that are there to avenge them, that are there to rally around them, that are there to defend their interests. That you can whip up a bunch of people to be angry at any one of them, widow, orphan, or a stranger, because who's going to step up to be on their side? There is no built-in defense for these people because they have, either by choosing to join the Jewish people, left their family behind, or by becoming a widow or orphan, have had their family taken away from them by death, and they are left behind. One way or another, these are the most vulnerable. And the Torah is conscious of human nature, that when people behave badly, they tend to pick the easiest targets they can. And a convert would be a much easier target than a native-born Israelite. Therefore, we need an extra level of reminder to love them and to treat them properly and with respect. Plus, says our commentary, there is a danger that is associated with how we treat a convert that is not the same level of danger with how we treat native-born Israelites. And that's that the convert might leave. They might go back to where they came from. They might go home, to the home that they had left in order to make a home among us. And when they do that, Well, especially in the ancient world, that means they are going back to idolatry. Judaism would still consider them a Jew, even if they had renounced their Jewish identity, and thus we would have created a burden of transgression for them to live under because they couldn't stand living among us anymore. We would have created more problems in this world by oppressing them than just being mean people, because we would have removed them, pushed them away from under the wings of the Shekhinah where they had sought protection, and now they are back in a worse position than where they were before they came to Judaism in the first place. A native Israelite would not have an easy path into those idolatrous nations. It was hard to move from nation to nation in the ancient world, and as such, the pressure against them would not normally result in them leaving. Again, doubly because they would probably have a support network. But somebody who had converted, all the more so we have to be careful that we do not drive them away from Judaism through the behavior of Jews. And unfortunately, it's far too often that Jews do not live up to the Judaism that they have inherited. And this is one of the more common issues that can arise. And so too in the modern world. Although people don't tend to drift into idolatry, they often will drift away from being connected or active in Judaism when they are treated badly. And unfortunately, I will say that even in the modern world, people still have a tendency to treat those who have chosen to come under the wings of the Shekhinah to convert and become Jewish. People have a tendency to treat them differently and often worse than they would somebody who had been born in Judaism, even if all other things are equal. So, good reasons to imagine that this verse is talking about the ger, about the convert. But on the other hand, it could be talking about the ger, the resident who's there, the stranger among you who's not Jewish. They just happen to be living among you. We have good evidence for that, or good support, because the second half of the verse, after all, harkens back to our experience in Egypt. And when we were in Egypt, did we convert to Egyptianism? Not exactly. We adopted, unfortunately, many of their practices, but we definitely still maintained our identity. We were not considered Egyptian by them, and we were not considered Egyptian by ourselves. And as such, conversion doesn't really seem as appropriate in this setting. It seems like this is talking about a general stranger. But if that's the case, why in the world should I love somebody that's just a generic stranger? They've shown no attachment to the Jewish people. They have not lined up with my culture, my values. They are not like me in any way. That's why they're a ger. That's why they're different. Why would the Torah tell me that I am supposed to love them? And, by extension, not oppress them. What's that? So we were once different. So the first is sympathy, right? Commiseration. Look, it wasn't great the way Pharaoh and the Egyptians treated us. We know how that felt. And if you know how much it hurt, how dare you make someone else hurt the same way? In a very short form, that seems to be what is one explanation for why we treat the stranger with more care than we might otherwise do. Simply because we know that pain, and we are therefore sensitive, attuned to have empathy for others who might experience that same pain.
We were all created by God.
So we are also all from Adam and Chava. We are all from Adam and Eve. We are all created by God, the same God, regardless of what others may believe in their own theology. Our theology says we all came from the same source. Therefore, they may be a stranger in that they come from a different place, they have a different passport, they might look different, they might speak different, they might worship different, but they're not so strange. They're not actually aliens. They're just strangers to me at the moment. And as such, I have an obligation to show them the same love that I would for any member of my family, because they are part of my extended family. They are my, 15th million removed cousin, but family they are still. Any other reasons why we would be called upon to love the stranger? So let me take what you're saying and start in a completely different way, and I hope you don't find it offensive. Do we have a problem with people who like to make animals suffer? You know, pull wings off of flies, hold the magnifying glass over ants, kick dogs, throw cats, just to see how they'll land on their feet. This is considered generally not a good character trait, right? And why would people do that to animals? Well, because they can. Because it's easy. Because they can get that thrill of power without too much worry, although I warn you about cats, they are quite capable of defending themselves. But they can get that thrill, that feeling of superiority without too much personal risk. Like we said before, and as Judy was reminding us, it's very easy to kick down. And the stranger, the one who comes from someplace else, like the Ger we discussed in the first half, has no support system. They've got no allies. They've got no people there to stand up for them by default, which means the temptation to treat them worse, to cheat them in their wages, to drive them away from where they had been living peacefully, to scorn them or mock them, is much greater than it is to do for people that have a more equal footing. That it becomes a great temptation to bully the stranger. And our tradition understood this, whether it was a convert or whether it was a stranger, meaning complete disconnect from our people, but happening to be around us. That is where we had to be most alert and most on guard, because that was where the temptation would be the strongest. And therefore we are commanded not only to avoid mistreating them, but to counterbalance that temptation by loving them. Because if you love them, you will not do this. Not merely to keep our hands away from evil, but to embrace them, so that in our hearts we will not be moved towards that type of behavior at all. It is a high bar, and it is difficult, and it is something that most cultures around the world fail at routinely. Having been a stranger in a strange land multiple times, living in both England, Japan, and Israel for extended periods, I can tell you that plenty of people in all of those places have treated me and my family very badly. And it's rough. But when you meet the people who treat you with love, it changes the world instantly. When you meet somebody who has no obvious reason for extending kindness to you when you are a stranger in their land, and they give you a little help, a little guidance, show you where the train station is, explain something that you're stuck at, it is an incredible moment of humanity. And it is an incredible reminder of what we can look for. When we talk about you were strangers in the land of Egypt, we almost always go back to our Passover story. We almost always go back to the killing of our children, of the enslavement and harsh labor of our people. But that is not the only thing the Torah wants us to bear in mind when it reminds us of our time in Egypt. It wants us to remember that we were taken in during a famine. When we are reminded of our time in Egypt, we have to remember the beginning as well as the end. The end was bad, but the beginning was a blessing. Our people were starving in the land of Canaan. They were near death, or else they wouldn't have gone down into Egypt in the first place. And the Egyptians not only gave us food, but they gave us a place to live to weather out that storm of the famine. And that we are meant to remind ourselves when a stranger comes into our midst. Not just that we not brutalize them or treat them terribly or take advantage of them, but we remember the good that was done to us when we needed it most. And we can do that good for them as well. When we remember that we were strangers, we have to remember, and someone took us in. And when we see a stranger, we have to do the same as well. Whether that word ger means convert or stranger in this particular passage that we read this morning is almost immaterial, because the meaning of the verse is powerful and undeniable regardless of which way you want to translate it. As we say with L'chadodi b'dibur echad, in one word God said two things: to take care of those who have come to Judaism and become Jews, and to treat them with special care and love, and to take care of those who are not becoming Jews, but are merely strangers among us, with care and with love. The Torah can sometimes say more than one thing at the same time. And when it does, we would be well advised to listen to it, because it is trying to shout it from the highest mountain, and it is something that is of essential need for ourselves and our world. Shabbat Shalom.